In this application, we have this add button for creating a new post. Now, in a real world application, we probably have a form somewhere. The user fills out that form and then clicks the save button. At that point, we need to create an object and send it to the backend for persistence. So on the backend, we'll get this object and store it in a database permanently. So now let's simulate this scenario. Back in our app.js, here we have this event handler, handle add. In this method, we want to create a new object. So object. As you have seen, our posts have at least two properties, title and body. So I'm setting these to arbitrary values. Now we want to send this to the server. So once again, we're going to use Axios for that. But this time, instead of using the get method, we'll use the post method. We use get for getting data and post for creating data. So Axios.post. Now the first argument is the URL of an endpoint. We're going to use the exact same URL. We don't want to duplicate this in multiple places. So let's cut this from here and store it in a constant called API endpoint. Now we can reuse this in multiple places. So back in component did mount, I'm going to pass that as the first argument to the get method, API endpoint. And similarly, in handle add, we're going to pass that to Axios.post, API endpoint. Now here, because we are creating data, we need to include this data in the body of the request. So we need to send this object to the server. So we'll pass that as the second argument to this method, object. Now similarly, this method returns a promise. So we should await it to get the response. Now, just like before, we use object destructuring to pick the data property and rename it to post. Because in this case, when we send an HTTP request to create a new post, the server or the backend will respond with the newly created post, not the entire list of posts. Okay. Now, because we have used the await keyword here, we should decorate this function with the async keyword. So we put async here. Note that here we have two different syntaxes. So component did mount is just a method in this class. That's why we put async here. But handle add is basically a property that we're setting to a function. That's why we apply async here and not here, right? So this is how we create data. Finally, let's log this new post on the console. Save the changes, back in the browser. Let's click add. Beautiful. So here's the object that we get from the server. It has the properties that we send to the server, title and body, but it also has an ID, which is the ID of this newly created post. That is 101. Now note that if I click add multiple times, the ID comes back as 101 or 102. It's not reliable because this is a fake service. So it doesn't return a unique identifier every time you create a new post. So we have sent our post to the server. Now we need to add this to our table. That is pretty easy and we have done this before. So we create a new array, posts. We want to add this new post at the beginning of this array. So we add that here and then we'll spread this .state.posts. And finally call this .setState posts. All right, let's test the application. So I'm going to click this and here's our new post. Beautiful. Now note that if we click this multiple times, we get this warning on the console, encounter two children with the same key 101. This is because these objects don't really have a unique identifier. Ignore this warning in this application. In a real application with a proper backend, you're not going to see this warning.